His friends told stories about how many records he had. Mick went a long way just to borrow a new record. He did more than just like blues music. He wrote about it. People couldn't believe he was British because he was so good at singing like his heroes. He wasn't trying to make anyone like him. His only goal was to feel the music in his body, and it showed. Then there was October 17, 1961. Mick was 18 years old and waiting for a train in Dartford with some blues music in his hands. Richards walked up at that point. They hadn't seen each other in many years. Keith saw the records right away. Muddy Waters and Chuck Berry. It made them feel something. They talked. For some reason, they both really loved music, which made them laugh. What are the chances? Two boys who were both crazy about type of music that almost no one else liked. We saw each other again on a regular passenger train. Everything changed in that one moment. Within a few weeks, they were getting together regularly to jam and listen to music. In a quiet way, that train ride started the Rolling Stones. Not long after the Stones were formed, in 1960, Mick, Keith, and their friend Dick Taylor formed a band. The band was known as Little Boy Blue and the Blue Boys. It wasn't just a fun thing to do. They meant business. They played cover songs of blues and R&B at parties and bars in the area, where most people had never heard that genre of music before. Mick was in the lead. He was brave and sure of himself, and he was already moving like a star. They used old Realtor tape machines to make rough demos. There are still some of those tapes around. American greats like Jimmy Reed and Bo Diddley gave them songs. Even though Jagger was only 17, his voice was already rough. People were already interested in him when he got on stage. He didn't wait to become famous. He put it together one gig at a time, chord by chord. But Jagger went in a strange direction, even though he was really into music. He began going to the London School of Economics in 1961. His plan was to study business, and maybe even become a businessman like his father. He got good grades. The people who taught him thought he was smart and driven. He learned about money and the law during the day. He played music in smoky clubs at night. It looked like he might give up everything for a moment. A safe life, a job at a desk, and a future in banking. But the music kept coming. It was 1962 when Jagger made a choice. He quit. Instead of going with a safe job, he jumped into rock and roll. His family was shocked. His friends were shocked. But history was changed. He might not have gained fame for the Rolling Stones if he hadn't taken that chance. Early Rolling Stones shows, like those at the Marquee Club in London, were loud and dirty. They played Chuck Berry and Muddy Waters songs. The name of the band comes from a Muddy Waters song called Rolling Stone. Their music and acting clicked right from the start. Brian Jones formed the band, but he quickly got into a fight with Mick and Keith over who was really in charge. That stress never really went away. Their first record, The Rolling Stones, came out in 1964. It came out on April 16th. It was rough and didn't try to be pretty. That's what made it strong. It went straight to #1 on the UK records chart and stayed there for 12 weeks. The last time came out in February 1965. It wasn't just another song. That song was their first UK #1, and Jagger and Richards wrote it. In the first week, they sold more than 250,000 units. They didn't just sound different with their loud guitars and strong words. They had a different feeling. All of a sudden, they weren't just a band. They showed a new kind of youth, not willing to give up, angry and ready to fight back. Then there was a huge hit. In June 1965, I'm Not Happy With Anything blew up. It was their first #1 song in the US and stayed there for 4 weeks. Keith Richards made the riff with a fuzz pedal and is said to not have remembered writing it. He recorded it while he was half asleep. The songs were angry, sexual, and talked about how ads and society make people feel used. Fans couldn't get enough of it, but some radio stations wouldn't play it. In the US, it sold more than 1 million copies in just a few months. Everything changed because of that song. The Rolling Stones became the wild and dangerous option to the Beatles. After that, they were rock's bad boys. But there were real effects of the revolt. Police broke into Keith Richards' house during a party on February 12, 1967. Mick Jagger, Keith, and a person who sells art were all taken. The charges were for having amphetamines and cannabis. But the incident was all that people were talking about. It was said that Marianne Faithfull was found at the scene of the crime wearing only a fur rug. Mick got 3 months. Andy got a year. Both of them were only locked up for 1 night before they were let go. The public's anger helped. A famous Times story asked, "Who breaks a butterfly on a wheel?" The bust made them famous, but it also showed how much older people feared what they stood for. Then, just 2 years later, the worst time for the band came. Brain Jones had been kicked out of the band in June 1969 because of his bad behavior and drug use. It wasn't even a month before he was found dead at the bottom of his pool in Sussex on July 3. He was only 27 years old. People who knew about it didn't believe the official story that it was death by misadventure. Mick and Keith were blamed by some. They said the band had let him down and betrayed him. Jones became a sad figure after he died. The famous 27 Club now has him on its list, along with Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and Kurt Cobain. It was a strange time. A few days before, the Stones had switched Jones out for Mick Taylor. Even years later, the shock never really went away. What happened seemed to worry Jagger and Richards. But Bob Dylan was born in Duluth, Minnesota, on May 24, 1941. He didn't grow up in a city, though. He grew up in the small town of Hibbing in Minnesota's Iron Rain. It was cold, quiet, and away from everything. Back then, only 17,000 people lived there. There was a huge iron mine in town. That was the world's largest open-pit iron mine. Life was easy because his dad worked for Standard Oil. It felt like the place was cut off from the rest of the world, though. He once said, "There's miles and miles of dirt outside your window." Still, that lonely town made him think of things. He listened to blues, country, and early rock on the radio, for hours on end on stations that were far away. That time spent alone made a mind that wouldn't shut up. He never learned how to play music. They weren't needed by him. He learned to play the piano and guitar by ear. When he was 10, he began writing songs. He started writing songs soon after. He learned from the radio. He liked Woody Guthrie, Hank Williams, and Muddy Waters the most. He was hit hard by Guthrie's songs. It wasn't just sound, it had a point. Dylan said that Guthrie seemed to be giving him the crown. But Dylan said something unimportant that changed everything. He said that some of the money should be used to help American farmers. It was this idea that led to Farm Aid, a series of benefit concerts that still happen today. Dylan began a tour that never really finished in 1988, which no one saw coming. He's played over 3,000 shows since June 7 of that year. He didn't go on tour to promote his songs. For fun, he went on tour. There were different song lists each time. Every layout was different. Dylan's band had to be ready for anything. He could play a song they hadn't practiced in years, or change the whole sound in the middle of a song. This never-ending tour was the center of his work for more than 35 years. Dylan was so different that even his bandmates had to get used to him. He told them things that didn't sound at all like musical orders. He might not have said play faster, but make it sound like it's raining, or think of the color blue. The musicians had to figure out what he meant. Bassist Tony Garnier had to figure out what Dylan was saying and pass it on a lot of the time. The band had to stay sharp and ready to change because of this. Dylan didn't want things to be perfect. Even his band couldn't keep up with him when he played the piano at a show in Pennsylvania in 2018. There had been acts like this before. It's what he does since the 1960s. Dylan didn't want to play the same songs over and over on stage. It was a spot to try new things. It was different every night. It was impossible to tell what he would do at Live Aid. A lot of people saw Dylan play with Keith Richards and Ronnie Wood in 1985. It should have been a big deal. It was a mess instead. It was out of tune on their guitars. The set was ruined by sound problems. He even broke a string in the middle of a song. He was given Wood's guitar, but it was barely workable. Some people who saw the show said it was awkward and painful. One musician remembered that Dylan did things his own way, by drinking wine in the studio. He had already changed most of the band by day 2. Just before the record was set to come out, Dylan changed his mind. The pressings were done, and the artwork was ready. He recorded half of it in Minnesota because his brother told him to. Most of the artists he used were unknown. Up until the last hour, he kept changing the words, keys, and arrangements. It went through at least 9 different forms. You're Going to Leave Me Alone. When You Go had 12 tapes, but Dylan still managed to make a masterpiece, despite everything that was going on. The same was true for Dylan's live shows. He changed keys in the middle of songs, skipped lines, or mumbled his words so much that fans couldn't tell what song they were hearing. It was called She's the Boss, and came out in 1985. Stars like Nile Rodgers and Jeff Beck backed him. Fans and reviewers didn't like it, even though it sold a lot and went platinum. The song Just Another Night reached number 12 on the Billboard charts. Neil Young joked, "Everyone had a copy, but no one listened to it." Jagger put out Primitive Cool in 1987. It just barely got into the top 40. The song was well done, but I didn't remember it. His show didn't even make it to the US. Afterwards, Richards said Jagger's personal work was just for show and didn't say anything. Those mistakes only made it more clear. It was both Jagger and the Stone that needed each other. At the same time, Bob Dylan was making something completely different. He began making Blood on the Tracks in 1974. He worked quickly for 4 days in a studio in New York to finish most of the record. The meetings were a mess. Dylan went quickly through songs, didn't fix mistakes, and often didn't stop to let people know. He's been with the Stones for almost 50 years, longer than both Brian Jones and Mick Taylor. Many people thought he would only be there for a short time. In the middle of the 1980s, the cracks between Jagger and Richards finally burst. Richards wanted to go on tour after Dirty Work came out in 1986, but Jagger didn't. His main goal was to work on his solo business, and he even wrote a formal letter to say no. Richards called it World War II, and they didn't say much to each other, besides writing mean words for their songs. The band pretty much broke up, but they became friends again, and came back with Steel Wheels in 1989. Only a few times in the history of rocks did a split this deep heal. Jagger tried to play by himself, while the Stones were taking a break. Things got messy behind the scenes though. By the middle of the 1970s, Keith Richards was hooked on heroin. He was caught in Toronto in 1977, with enough heroin to be charged with dealing. That could have led to life in jail. During those times, Richards would disappear during recording projects. Mick Jagger had to be in charge. He was in charge of everything, from the music to the legal stuff. While Jagger kept the band going, Richards got even more hooked on drugs. When Keith finally came back, Jagger wasn't ready to share the stage any longer. There was strain after that change that never really went away. By the end of 1974, the Stone had been hit by another shock. Mick Taylor left the band. Since Let It Bleed, his bluesy guitar had been a big part of their sound, but he quit just days before they started making a new album. It was a bad time. The band got confused. That's when Ronnie Wood came in. He had played with Jeff Beck and Faces, but Keith's style was rougher and more in line with it. Wood quickly clicked with the band. At the time, that little trick cost them $34,175, a crazy amount that today would be worth a lot of money. The risk paid off though. It went straight to #1 in both the US and the UK, and in the US alone it sold more than 3 million copies. It was the first of 8 straight #1 records. A lot of people loved songs like Brown Sugar and Wild Horses right away. Sticky Fingers was added to the Grammy Hall of Fame in 1999. After that, Exile on Main Street came out in 1972. The band made it in a villa in France, while they hid from the UK taxman. The meetings were crazy and chaotic, but the end result was magical. Some reviewers still say it's one of the best rock records ever. Not only did these 2 songs top the charts, they also set the standard for 1970s rock and roll music. Dylan took out his guitar and began to play. The room went quiet. He was lost in his own thoughts. Strange rhythm, words, and patterns that change all the time. No one else joined in. Jagger said he wanted to do it but didn't feel like it. The beat of the song wasn't clear. No one could follow. Everyone just looked. Some people thought they were seeing genius. Some people were confused. No one went along with it. That get-together could have been a big deal. It showed that some artists, no matter how good they are just too different to work together. Dylan lived in his own world. The Stones had theirs. There was a quiet nod at the end of that night between 2 worlds that couldn't mix. The Rolling Stones put out Sticky Fingers in 1971. It was more than just a record. It was their first album under their own label, and the tongue and lips logo that they are now known for was on it. The cover was made by Andy Warhol and had a real zipper. It wasn't just that these artists didn't sound like each other. It was because Dylan was so crazy and out of control. His strange instructions, like "play it like it's raining," made artists think they had to figure out what to do right away, when he walked into a session with only half-written songs. That's not how the Stones worked. They put songs together one part at a time. They did takes over and over until everything fit together. That was the sound they made. That was who they were. Being in Dylan's world could ruin that for Jagger, he thought. Dylan wasn't trying to be in charge. He naturally drew everything to him. Jagger also didn't want to lose charge of his band. One night in 1972 made the distance between them really clear. Dylan went to a club in New York where Jagger and other famous people were hanging out. The answer was no from both Paul McCartney and Mick Jagger. Maybe not, but not. We should talk later. No, please. That was the end of it. McCartney was already having a lot of trouble with the Beatles. He was in a fight with Lennon. It looked like the band might split up. He probably thought it would be a nightmare to add more strong personalities to the mix. Jagger had a different reason. He was making it clear who the Stone was. They were the rebel, the rough and tough option to the smooth Beatle. Putting that picture together with Dylan's way of wandering around could make things more difficult. He didn't want Dylan's world to take over the Stones. Even Glenn Johns agreed that maybe they were right when they looked back. It might have been too big or hard to take off. Fans still talk about it though. Think about what might have happened after that. 6 legends on one record. Everything might have been different. Jagger later gave a better explanation of his fear. Dylan and George had already worked together, and George would later join Dylan in the Traveling Wilburys. Keith felt the same way. He thought the idea was great. It was okay with Ringo, Charlie, and Bill Wyman. They said they'd join if everyone else did too. They had nothing against it. They didn't want to make a scene by themselves. There were more sides to John Lennon. He didn't say no, but he wasn't interested. Maybe he didn't want to give up work. He might have thought it was too messy to pull off. He didn't push for it either way. It was strange that the idea didn't fall apart right away. Most of the time, people with these kinds of big names had big egos. But this time the door was open for a while. People were really interested. Dylan changed the way the Beatles thought about lyrics. Harrison and Richards were 2 of the most famous guitarists of their time, and they were ready to work together. Then there was a hard stop. Something crazy almost happened in the world of rock music in 1969. Out of the blue, Bob Dylan offered that the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and him form a supergroup. It wasn't just a crazy thought at a party. Dylan went to New York producer Glenn Johns' house and told him, "I want to make a record with the Stones, the Beatles, and myself. Maybe you could ask the other bands if they'd be interested." Johns had just worked with both of them. He worked with the Beatles on Get Back and the Stones on Beggar's Banquet. He was sure it wasn't a joke. The name was Dylan. It was real. It's possible that Dylan, the Beatles, and the Stones will all be on the same record. The thought was crazy. John knew he had to give it a shot. He got to work right away. The plan was to use Dylan, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, Mick Jagger, and Keith Richards' best songs. After that, mix and match the beat part. It would have been great to work with Ringo Starr, Charlie Watts, or Bill Wyman, or whoever fit the song the best. It was possible to do it. The songs were all set. The time was just right. It wasn't a dream. It was almost true. Not all of the singers were happy when Johns talked to them, but some were pleasantly surprised. George Harrison and Keith Richards didn't think twice. It seemed like a great idea to them. They both had a lot of respect for Dylan. He and the band set up in the basement of a pink house in Woodstock in 1967. Their first goal was to have fun while making songs. It wasn't finished well. They made more than 100 songs in just a few months, sometimes 10 or 15 in a single day. It wasn't meant to be released. Other acts went on to have hits with some of those songs. In 1975, the meetings were finally made public as the basement tapes. There was less of a wild and electric feel to the songs, and more of an American history to them. This was Dylan changing into a new person. Then there was another surprise. Dylan put out John Wesley Harding in December 1967. It was simple, quiet, and full of strange stories from the Bible. It was only recorded 3 times. It got to number 2 in the US and number 1 in the UK. While Jimi Hendrix was singing it, one of its songs, All Along the Watchtower, became a rock classic. But Dylan didn't end there. Nashville Skyline came out in April 1969. He went all the way across the country this time. His voice was quieter, the words were clearer. They sang together on the song Girl from the North Country. In the UK, the record was number 1, and in the US, it was number 3. Next, he growled at his band and said, "Play it loud." They then played like a Rolling Stone loud and clear. A bootleg of that moment, which was raw and rebellious, was made and passed around for years. People now think it was one of the best live shows ever. But Dylan stopped making music just as his electric age was at its peak. He lost control of his Triumph motorbike near Woodstock, New York, on July 29, 1966. He broke a few vertebrae in his neck, but there were no hospital records or an ambulance. Some people think the crash wasn't really that bad, or that it never happened at all. Some say Dylan used it as an excuse to get away from the fame and stress, and maybe even his drug issues. No matter what the truth was, the end result was the same. Dylan disappeared from the public eye. He stopped going on tour. Some fans thought he had died. He stayed mostly out of the public eye for the next 8 years. Instead of going on stage, Dylan started making records at home. Reports say that Pete Seeger, a member of the festival board, got so angry that he tried to cut the wires with an axe. He later said that it was just because the sound was too distorted. Dylan left the stage after only 3 songs, such as Maggie's Farm and Like a Rolling Stone. It was too late. He came back and played 2 quiet acoustic songs, which made the crowd cheer, but it was too late. It had been 37 years since Dylan's last visit to Newport. People still talk about that night as one of the most important in music history. After less than a year, things got even worse. Dylan played the first part of his show at the Free Trade Hall in Manchester, England, on May 17, 1966, with only an acoustic guitar. People in the crowd listened quietly. Then, after the break, he came back with the Hawks, a full electric band. The mood quickly changed. Someone in the crowd yelled, "Judas!" Right before the show ended. It hit like a bomb. He replied, "I don't believe you. You're lying." It became clear that these weren't just tuned. It was a message. They were fuel. People spoke out against the war at the March on Washington, at anti-war protests, and on college campuses. His song was being sung everywhere, even by people who didn't know what would happen to him. He was only in his early 20s, but his songs changed the world. He didn't want to be a hero even back then. "I'm just a song and dance man," he said one time. Some things went wrong on his trip, though. At the Newport Folk Festival, on July 25, 1965, Bob Dylan went on stage with an electric guitar in his hand. He was only 24 years old. At this point, everything changed. People came to hear Dylan's regular acoustic folk songs, but what they got was loud electric rock. Members of the Paul Butterfield Blues Band and guitarist Barry Goldberg were in his band. People in the crowd were shocked. People were crazy about it. Some fans screamed, booed, and threw things. Folk music fans felt let down by it. He had signed greats like Billie Holiday. It didn't bother him that Dylan's voice was rough or strange. He saw that there was fire inside. It was in 1961 that Hammond signed him to Columbia Records. A lot of people at the label thought it was wrong. Dylan Hammond's folly was what they called it, but Hammond believed. There was a Dylan record that came out in March 1962. It only took 2 days to record. He wrote only 2 of the songs. That year, only 5,000 copies were sold. He did sing old folk songs in a different way, though. To be honest, it was intense. It was already polished. You had to listen. After that, a crazy thing happened. He wrote Blowing in the Wind in 1962. Peter, Paul, and Mary put out their version the following year. In just 1 week, more than 300,000 copies were bought. It made it to number 2 on the Billboard lists. In 1963, The Times, They Are A-Changing was released as another protest song. Joan Baez helped get the word out about it. She sang Dylan's songs on TV and at meetings.